I think one of the hardest things that we have to deal with sometimes with our aging parents is kind of convincing them what to do. Sometimes we think we know what they're supposed to do.
And trying to get them to do what we want them to do.
Yes.
We decided to bring in Sarah Hyde-Williams today. She's with Senior Living Advisors of Austin. Thanks so much for being with us today. I know you deal with this a lot. I know we know that you deal with this issue a lot.
I talk an awful lot of families through this very same thing. Yes.
Well, I think that, I can point back to when I wanted my mom to start looking into the idea of moving into independent living. And while I and my brother thought this would be the best option for her, she wasn't super receptive at first. Mm-hmm. And so it really took actually us sort of stepping back. And it was my uncle, actually, her brother, who actually was the one who brought up the idea again, and it worked that time to where it became mom's idea. So I think that the challenge is it just sort of when we have children, you want it to be their idea, but how do we make that happen, if you will?
Yeah. I talk an awful lot with my hands, and in the trainings that I do, it's being able to see from someone else's perspective. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Whether or not they still have that ability to do so or not, mm-hmm. or they flat out, they don't see the need for it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think the stubbornness is sometimes the first. So let's start with focusing on the parents of ours who do have the cognitive ability to be able to make their own decisions. We'll start there first.
But we still want to convince them that this is probably a better way, Dad, or this, Mom, let's do it this way. That's not always easy to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that's a sit-down conversation we have to have. There's a couple of ways to go about that instead of, could you do this? Because we know they have the capability in which to do it, mm-hmm. but would you, or this would really help me out. Mm-hmm. Or if they are within those capabilities of making that decision, hey, we want to propose an idea to you. What do you think?
Yeah. And what do you do when they say not interested? or that they just really don't want to do, even though you ask them to?
Yeah. Oftentimes families will say, hey, it's a safety concern. I see a safety concern. If it's really not, and we're just thinking it's a really cool idea because we want Mom to have more socialization. Mm-hmm. In essence, is this the hill we want to die on? Mm-hmm. So is this the conversation we really absolutely have to have? Can we table it for a little bit later, mm-hmm. and talk about it at a later time when they're thinking, hey, Kim, I was thinking about all my friends live down at the independent living community down the road. I was thinking that it might be a good time to move. Mm. Eureka.
Right. Thankfully, that's what ended up happening to me, is that we had talked about this with my mom at Christmas time, and her brother came to see her in January, and she calls me and says, oh, hey, I can't wait for you to come so you can see where I'm moving. And I said, oh, you're moving, are you? Great. And while at first I was very shocked and sort of, did you sign a contract? And I wish you would have talked to us about this before. On the one hand, though, I was so grateful that it was her decision. So
her decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So that even though she was nervous about it, and she did have some hesitations as it got closer, we could say, well, like, Mom, this is what you decided would be a really good option. Do you feel like these are the conversations or the situations that come up most when we're wanting our parents either to bring in help at home or move to a retirement community or take the keys away or those kinds of things? Are those the kinds of conversations that you see this most often?
Any or all of those. Mm-hmm. And the majority of those at its very root cause are safety measures. Mm-hmm. Those are measures that we are concerned that if we don't make a move or bring in help or give up the keys, that some harm will come either to self or others.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The hard part to me is that it's such a psychological game because we have to deal with our parents and the relationship that we already have there and their attitude about things, how they are, how we are, and we're all different. And so it's hard for me to see how Kim deals with her mom and copy that for how I deal with my dad, because everyone's different. So in that way, it's such a game that you have to figure out what's best for you.
And every single family is different. Every individual is different. And that's where those family dynamics come into play. Mm-hmm. We know that Mom needs this to be her idea. And therefore, we're going to plant those little seeds, or like Hansel and Gretel, we're going to put down the little cookie crumbs and we're going to lead them to the decision of, you know what, I really should move, or I should bring in some help. These are getting harder for me.
Yeah.
So those are, or here's the keys. Those are some of those ideas that we can plant those seeds, but ultimately, if they're within the right, they're within those capabilities of making that decision for themselves, they should be led to that idea, but it really needs to be their idea.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes I would imagine, because I haven't been in that situation myself, but I imagine there's a control issue, and not control in a bad way, but just control of, if I move to an independent living, or if I give up the keys, I'm losing a lot of my independence. I'm losing some of my control. And so how do we take that into consideration? Because I think it's easy for us as the child to look at them and say, Mom, this would be the best thing for you. But how do we also then think about where they're coming from?
We have to think about where they're coming from, very much so. If we can talk about driving for a second, that is the first, in essence, piece of independence that we got. Can you guys remember when we're 15 or 16, we get our driver's permit. We come home going, Dad, can I borrow the keys to the car? I'm going to take my girlfriend out for a date night to the movies. That was freedom. And so to turn around at the age of 75, 80, and have to give that back up, very much so. It's a loss of freedom, of independence. But knowing there may be a safety measure in that as well, they're not thinking that piece. Maybe some alternatives. Absolutely, call me anytime. I'll take you where you need to go. Or providing alternatives within their control in which to make that happen, so they don't lose that independence per se. They just don't hold those car keys any longer.
And they're not used to us telling them what to do. They're the parent. They've most of our lives told us what to do, right?
Very much. Yes. Yeah. They're used to making those decisions, watching out for us. And so now shoes on the other foot. And so we are watching out for them, and we see things that maybe they don't.
I love the analogy you use as far as getting your driver's license as a teenager, because Kim and I were talking over the weekend about how, in so many ways, dealing with aging parents, while we're not very experienced with it, but we've been very experienced dealing with teenagers. And it's so similar in a lot of ways that you have to convince them to make the right choice on their part by themselves, but we're kind of pushing them that way.
Well, another piece of this in the dementia work that I do, as teenagers, we don't fully develop that prefrontal cortex, that ability to use judgment and insight and weigh decisions. We don't develop that until we're 20, 25. Now, girls develop that sooner, but that is also through the course of brain change. The older we get, that's the first thing we lose. So very much that ability to see it from somebody else's point of view, the ability to make good judgments and have insight, and to say, hey, now is the time. Let me give up the keys. Yeah.
Just raises so many tough situations for them. When you do have some dementia involved, what are the things that we can, that might be able to help them see those challenges? Because sometimes they either may forget that we've had the issue with, oh yeah, you've locked yourself out of your phone 10 times this week, or whatever, or you're relying on help too much of the independent living, or whatever those situations are, or you're doing things that you gave money again over the phone to somebody. So with dementia, how do you help them see some of those things when they may frankly not remember what you've asked them to do?
Or it's the inability of having that skill in which to have that judgment, that insight, the ability to do for themselves any longer. So we have to be able to either make that decision to step in or step back. So if it is truly a safety measure, there are some things that we can do phone-wise, the other type situations that come up, that we can do things behind the scenes change the settings on their phone or the ability to make long distance phone calls or that type of thing. So we can do some things behind the scenes, but also being able to step in and make those decisions and be okay with that.
Yeah. But that's not always easy sometimes, especially if you have to actually, quote unquote, make them do something. That's hard to do sometimes.
So at its very core, this is a person we are in relationship with.
Right.
We're not in control of them. We're not, in essence, making them do something they don't want to do. But thinking about it in other terms of, if I step in, is it okay that she may be mad at me for a little bit and it will dissipate?
Yeah.
Or am I okay with stepping back and allowing something bad to happen?
Right.
So how do you
other.
know? How do you know
Yeah.
when which is
But
the right action?
again, that's so much like having teenagers.
Mhm.
You know, we've dealt with that with teenagers in the past, and it's similar in that respect, I think.
That is where being that parent, being in that parental role, now that shoe's on the other foot, that we have to make a judgment call.
Yeah.
Is it for their best interest? Do we need to make this happen? And no guilt, no shame. We make the decision knowing that there may be some hard feelings, but they will get over that. Or do we step back and allow the chips to fall where they may? Who's to say it ends up in an APS referral because there are some safety issues at play? Or we wait until something happens, maybe an emergency room visit, that now we have to make the decision and someone else gets to be the bad guy, like the doctor or the case manager that says, now you have to move to assisted living.
Yeah.
And I think it's so hard when you can see, just like with our kids, often you see what this is, where this is leading, when they're start driving or whatever it is, you can almost anticipate this is not going to end well. And yet sometimes having to make the decision to, we often hear people talking about with our kids, you have to let them fail so that they can learn from it. But often when it's our parents, and certainly when there's a safety issue, that's very different than if it's just, okay, you might have given
something silly with a teenager.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I worked with a family most recently that dad felt compelled to change light bulbs. And so what it took to change those light bulbs was getting up on a 5-foot ladder. They moved the ladder. Wow. Where is that ladder? Oh, well, it was here just the other day. Can we do that later?
Yeah.
Can let's have dinner first and then we'll go find the ladder.
Exactly.
That type of thing, to where we make modifications in their environment. And this is really truly when dementia is at play. We don't want to trick them, fool them in that sort, but we can arrange that environment that is safer, puts us in a greater peace of mind, and keeps them safe.
Okay,
Right.
so definitely some things to think about as far as what are the actions we can potentially take that just eliminate some of those potential safety challenges,
So that everybody gets a win.
Well, and then when there are those situations, though, when as you mentioned, we're not in control, because if they have the cognitive ability to make their own decisions, they can make their own decisions, and we don't have the authority to necessarily to do that for them unless we have to get that authority, and it becomes that becomes a whole different issue, right?
It does. A power of attorney is great, but they still have free will, in which it depends on the way the power of attorney is written. And you've had a phenomenal attorney on that has spoken to powers of attorney. Guardianship is another matter. If we have to go down that road, then it does give us the authority in which to make that decision. And oftentimes that's a last stop for most families.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess bottom line is, learn the tools that we can use to help have these conversations with our parents, help try to convince them, if you will, that our idea might be the right challenge, and yet still let it be their decision.
Yep. Plant those little seeds.
And be willing. I think the hardest thing, because I think something we see in our group often is the frustration of, I know this is the right thing for my parents and they won't do it. And how do you step back without feeling guilty or
Getting upset?
Yeah, getting upset about it.
Yeah. Very
Well,
much so.
Sarah Hyde-Williams, thanks so much for all these tips. It's going to help a lot of us
You're welcome.
to convince our parents in so many ways.
Yeah.
It is challenging because some parents are going to be more easily convinced than others.
Yeah. Not always easy, but you do the best that you can. If you have any topics you'd like for us to discuss here on Parenting Aging Parents, please let us know.